Hello, 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 and good evening to everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the first edition. I have a very talented creator with us tonight. Very fitting that his work will be shown on the official 13th episode of the first edition. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we?
You have a
And
thing
here
in
we
the
go. Hey, hello everyone. We're back with the first edition. I am your humble host, the Literature Devil, and with me I have the ever talented Slick Jimmy. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. It's much appreciated.
And before we get going, I'm going to ask chat or the people who are here right now. Can you hear Slick Jimmy? Because
Hello, can you guys hear me?
we had a issue last time with people not being able to hear my guest, and I'm hoping that won't happen this time. I'll just wait
I'm,
for a little bit for the chat to catch up with us.
I should probably bring you up in YouTube. One second.
Yes. Okay. Good. I'm getting a confirmation that they can hear both of us, which is amazing, awesome, and a huge relief, actually. So, which means that I can now continue interviewing independent creators. But at the moment, I'm very excited to be interviewing Slick Jimmy in particular because he has created a work that's right up my alley, and that's a very interesting work, and that's more than the chosen aesthetic that he's chosen. The We are going over his comic that he's been working on for some time here called Little Girl Lethal, and it seems to be a very well done, very well developed, uh, no pun intended, a passion project. So, could you go ahead and give us a little introduction?
Well, basically, I've been working on this universe for a long time. I'm gonna put something up here that some people look at. Apparently, I'm having a hard time finding the window of my Hangout. Weird. What the deal is? All right, so about let's see, about 1995. I was trying to get into the film and television industry, and I was in school and I was traveling around, and I've always fancied myself a little bit of a writer, and so I was writing little short stories and ideas for novels and so forth, and I've written some trunk novels that I'm not ever going to show anybody because they really suck. But I came up with an idea of from some things that I really enjoyed in my life and in influence and so forth, and I kind of amalgamated things together over time. And initially, if you know R.J. Carter, he's local in kind of community. He currently writes, and he's the ghostwriter for the Destroyer series, which is a long running series that I've always liked. It's about a, a government organization called Cure, and they have two main characters: Chun, the master of Sinanju, and Remo Williams, who is his apprentice slash adopted son, uh, and he teaches him the sun source of all martial arts called Sinanju. Now, I go into that for one reason: is that the pairing that you might see on your screen right here of X, who is a herdsman of the apocalypse, and his adopted daughter, Sugar Lightspeed, are kind of that similar paradigm. I kind of drew from that idea, but I drew from other things like Blade Runner. I love that world, the dark urban setting, uh, and I like the idea that in the future there's a lot of things that will be very human, but also very inhuman, and it'll all be mixed together. Things like Akira, Fifth Element, Sin City, obviously, and um, there's other things, but those are kind of the seminal things that I kind of bouillabaissed in and made my world. And the world is called Lost Peaks, which is a megalopolis city set. If it's an alternate Earth, and so if you were to think of our Earth, Lost Peaks would be where Yellowstone is, and uh, and in this world, the great caldera of the Valley of Lost Peaks is the basically the maw, of that super volcano there, much more dramatic than Yellowstone is in our world. But this magnificent city is kind of the veneer, the facade of the corruption underneath. It comes from wealth, kind of an unending wealth that stems from the mines beneath the city. And in this city, anything can be had for a price, kind of like Sin City in a way. But it's very much run in an idea that each section of the city is called a claim, going back to the families that claimed the area to mine. And now they have houses that are very much like an aristocracy, although in the broader world they are part of a union, and there's a whole different history to this world. And so I spent over 20 years kind of developing the ideas and some backstories, a lot of short stories and plot threads and things like that that have helped me kind of flesh out this world to such an extent that I feel now capable of presenting to the world. Now, I've always kind of liked the stereotypical trope of the sexy schoolgirl, and I don't know a very few males who are heterosexual that don't dig that trope, and it's been done many different times. But my girl, Sugar, is to me, she's singular, and she has a very different style and look and vibe about her from other similar types of girls that have been employed across manga and other media. She's had a very bad backstory. Like she's not flawless, like some people have been doing lately with new characters that they try to make. She has many flaws. Beauty is not one of them, or maybe that's a curse, depending on how you look at it. But she has a fragile psyche. That
This backstory is exactly one of the things that intrigued me because it really feeds into the inspiration you name Sin City and Frank Miller, and that's one of the things that really caught my attention because I am a big Sin City fan and I'm a huge Frank Miller fan. Disregarding his obvious mistakes, but when Frank Miller obviously does a good job, when he's on ball, when he's on point, Frank Miller is excellent.
He's classic.
Mhm.
And obviously the Dark Knight, Sin City, I think 300 as well. Even though he takes license with the original story, those are going to be standing the test of time. People will be reading those 100 years hence and enjoying them, in my opinion. And so I would hope that before I kick the bucket and give up the ghost and so forth, that I can craft something as interesting, at least for me and those people who follow me, as has happened with Frank Miller. I don't have any illusions about having the type of success that he had, but you never know.
Right. I mean, what to me let me go ahead and just. I told you this before we started streaming, but I think I told that Umbrella guy when I interviewed him about the Littlest Umbrella that I am very pro indie, but even with this huge indie movement called Comicsgate, which I follow a lot, and I'm not saying that you're Comicsgate or whatever, but what I'm saying is that I don't just back anything. I don't just back an independent creator because they side with one movement or another. I like to back projects that I personally believe in, that I personally find something of value in. So, for example, I didn't back Cyberfrog. I support the creation of Cyberfrog. I like the fact that it exists and it's allowed to exist, but I didn't back it because that's not really my cup of tea. Now, I did back the Littlest Umbrella, mainly because I like the horror element of it. I like how it's Cthulhu-esque, but also for all ages, and that's why it's really intriguing to me.
Yeah, an all ages Lovecraftian tale is something that is very intriguing.
I want to see how it plays out. And
Yeah,
Little Girl Lethal caught my attention, visuals aside, because of all these influences that you list. Now, aside from Frank Miller, that we just previously covered, you also mentioned that it is heavily influenced by the pulps. And anyone who's ever listened to me for more than 5 minutes know that I am also a huge fan of the pulps and the pulp fiction era in general.
Um, Pulps are one of those things that I don't want to get too back in my own backstory, but I was, ADHD, one of those space cadet kids in the corner, living in his own imagination, and on top of that, I was dyslexic, so it was very hard for me to read. And once I did, learn how to read proficiently, one of the things that I found almost immediately was Edgar Rice Burroughs,
Oh
and
yes, yes.
subsequently, I found Robert E. Howard, and I
Hmm.
found Lovecraft. And I'm blanking on the guy who did a. No, I can't, I'm blanking on his name. But I went into a lot of pulps,
Hmm.
and a lot of sci-fi that kind of grew out of the pulps in themselves. Obviously, I think comic books are an extension of the pulps as well.
Oh yes.
Just they added the sequential art to them, and this escapism that comes from that, and delving into worlds, and I also read a lot of detective novels and westerns, a
Hmm.
lot of Llewellyn Moore, Zane Grey, Dashiell Hammett, that sort of thing. Um, Over time, let me think of another. Mike Hammer did read a ton of those, and then there's campy as you want to be, but you're never bored. And like I said, one of the pulps that remains part of this story is the Destroyer series, and I would recommend those to anybody if they want to read something that's just escapist craziness and a little bit of political satirical stuff going on. At the same time, you could read something like Mac Bolan, The Executioner, which basically was Jerry Conway ripped off and made Punisher. Just for my opinion. But there you go. I when it comes to pulp, man, that's where it's at, to learn how to do descriptive writing, and to jump into stories and just kind of rollick along really quickly, because a lot of them came from uh, doing things like they do a chapter in like an anthology book of different stuff, and then those were later compiled. So they'd have these short stories that were a chapter that were serialized, and then later on that you got the whole thing, the whole vision put together. That's if anybody's ever read A Princess of Mars,
Hmm. Hmm.
that's one of the reasons why it seems a little bit disjointed, even though it's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
Uh, it just doesn't properly hang together in our way of doing an arc, but it does. It's still one of the most influential books and series of, I guess, writings ever, because I think the 20th century was informed by that world of Barsa, which is my favorite world of his, not Tarzan, although Tarzan's good too.
Hmm. And Tarzan is really good. I'm actually recently went over all the. I haven't not like I've gone over it on a live stream or anything like that. But I mean, I read over again Burroughs's John Carter,
Hmm.
and it's yeah, it's very. You can see how it's very influential. I mean, why would it would be very influential? Because the backstory. I mean, the meta narrative is very interesting because Burroughs was very interested in joining like the cavalry, and his whole life changed when he took I believe, a trip to Montana. He was going
Hmm.
to be like the your average working stiff, going into the office and everything. And he decided he had a very bright future. And this is something that I've seen happen with a few writers who became rather prolific. In that they usually had like a promising career in or secure career, in fact, as a businessman or as a scholar or as a lawyer, and then they find their calling as a writer, and they just toss it all away to be that writer. And Burroughs did something similar, and you see that in his very first John Carter, where John Carter, I believe, was a cavalryman hunting
Yeah.
down Indians, and
And,
he all of a sudden he just appears on Mars, and it's insinuated that he died, I think, but he appears on Mars, and if you go through it, it's a very powerful power fantasy. All of a sudden he sees these strange creatures, and he seems very out of place because he's still human. He's still as human as far as anyone knows. And but for some reason, he has this incredible strength that even the greatest warriors of Mars seem to respect and fear, and really can't compete with. So yeah, imagine it's that tapping into that primal fantasy of stepping into a whole new world where you're the outsider, but you have the strength to make changes, and that people can't really pin you down. You can actually rebel if you want to. You can actually make changes. You can actually fight the power, and that's very primal. And I think that's why it remains so visceral in the minds of the people who enjoy the pulps in general, because the pulps were all about that. Pulps in general were all about tapping into the primal needs of humanity. The things we love to read about, the things we like to enjoy. And that can span from being a detective, following a hard-boiled detective as he claws through a dark city and trying to uncover an even darker crime, or something as strange as looking into the unknown, like with Lovecraft, or watching Conan fight a bunch of strange Cthulhu-esque entities while trying to protect a beautiful woman in the deepest, darkest pits of a dungeon. You know, there are even magazines like Spicy Detective or something like that, where it's a detective story with a lot of sex and violence in it. And that's the pulps span a bunch of genres and a bunch of things, but it all comes down to what are we interested in, what do we find entertaining to the widest amount of people, and and it really taps into at its base our most base instincts, and what we find interesting it taps into the fantasies people tend to have. So that's why the pulps are so important, and that it's not about just living through a power fantasy. It's about taking people out of reality for just a little bit. Because if you remember the pulps, I mean the golden age of pulp era, they tend to be during an era of strife, and it was an era of things when reality is weighing on the people that are living it. They're being crushed by reality, and sometimes you need a little break, just a little break. And that's what really helped, I think, a lot of these people during that time. And that's not to go into that, that whole thing, but that's why escapist fiction is so important. That's why escaping reality is so important for people, because humanity has done that since the beginning of time, ever since people sat around and told stories with the oral tradition. So what's so intriguing to me about Little Girl Lethal was not just the influences, but the fact that it seemed to tap into this. I mean, it's gratuitous, it's over the
It
top
is
in all the
definitely
ways I
is.
love, in all the ways that I think I like, people like, and I think are in fact very important to have. I mean, it's very important to have a work like this that's not afraid to go over the top and be shamelessly over the top in every way possible. And that seems to me, you have the aesthetic down, or the sex and violence. How violent is this Little Girl Lethal going to be, and how gory is it going to be? Is it going to be like Sin City
Um,
levels?
yeah, and I don't pull any punches. We don't go. I wouldn't say it's Fangoria type stuff, but it definitely it's going to be graphic in
Mhm.
both nudity and in violence. I'm not one to pull back too much. I think
Mhm.
there are some issues and things that you don't want to depict.
Right.
Um, just to be fully upfront, Sugar, her character when she was young was sexually abused by a ring of pedophiles, and that's a lot of her damage psychically. So I have to kind of depict that in a way without getting too, um, too descriptive.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone wants to see
No,
that part.
no,
I mean,
they don't.
just leave it in the okay, it happened. You don't need
Right.
to see that. But everything else, I mean, that's
But there's a couple of pages where she's discovered by her father X,
mm,
who, and he sees the place that she has been kept in, at least for this particular part of her life. And so we have to work around certain things, obviously. But I think we've done it tactfully enough that when those pages are addressed, and then you'll understand, and it won't hopefully be too offensive. Who knows? I mean, everybody get offended by everything today, but um, and there are some interesting dynamics between her. She has some, I guess, her character has peccadillos,
Hmm.
and she would prefer to have no clothes on. That's how she's been kept, and so clothes feel weird to her. And I wrote it that way because I've actually done a lot of research on people who've had traumatic experiences, and weird stuff happens in people's heads. And so I'm trying to give you an insight into her, and cause you to love her, even though she ends up doing some pretty horrific things, because she's dealing with her own stuff. So her character, like I said, is not a Mary Sue, although she eventually she'll become very overpowered. But that's part of the curse that she has. She's trying not to use that ability to basically do anything she wants because she doesn't want to become a monster like who preyed upon her, and that's part of her own saga, her own journey. So
Right, and I wouldn't be too afraid of producing a Mary Sue. I mean, if you look at probably one of the most famous stories from Sin City, which involves Marv. Uh, I
mm,
mean, if you look at Marv, I mean, he's very powerful. He's overly strong. He's pretty much invincible, and he can kill pretty much anyone. But you think he'd be Mary Sue because of all the things he can do, and how much power he packs, and how little even bullets and knives and being hit by a car several times impacts him. He just kind of shakes that stuff off. But it's about having them go walk through the plot and story without you really giving in them anything. Like they're going to the story instead of the story kind of or bowing to them. They have to deal with the consequences and deal with the obstacles rather than the story or the writer tending. Basically, it's usually the Mary Sue character is usually a character that's very much blessed by the writer. So anything that comes up to it, anything that opposes your Mary Sue in any way, will be instantly dealt with. So as long as it's she's not treated special in any way. It's not really. It's you don't have to worry about it being a Mary Sue as long as there is.
yeah.
She pays for everything. She suffers for her flaws. That sort of thing. I mean, it's kind of difficult to make a Mary Sue unless you just. That's why Mary Sues tend to remain in the realm of fan fiction and in when you're a fledgling writer. Usually, when you're a kid or something, that's when you usually write a Mary Sue, and then you kind of just grow out of it. But I mean, unless you're kind of a weirdo that's like that works for Marvel or something, then people tend to know how to write a character. They eventually learn how to write a character, so it's usually not too big of a problem writing a Mary Sue. So this doesn't seem
Well,
like a case like that to me.
and it's strangely enough, I do like a lot of people say they can't relate to overpowered characters. I like to make overpowered characters, but then I like to, give them a tragic flaw or
Mm-hmm.
something that they can't overcome because, even if you have all kinds of power, there's certain things that'll, like say with X, he doesn't have any flaws per se that could assail him before he takes her in, and then because he finds a love for this girl, like to treat her like a daughter, that makes his arm. There's a crack in his facade. You
Mm-hmm.
can get to him now through her, uh, and those are things that like you can explore all kinds of strange things. He may be invincible, like in a fight, um, so within reason. But I mean, anything that's done to her will break him, from what he once was. And that's the kind of things that I like to do. I like to take characters and give them lots and lots of strength, but then give them plenty of flaws to play with, and then torture, live, and death out of them because that makes an interesting story.
Now you said you have in the description here on your Indiegogo that this started off as a short story or a novelization.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a whole bunch of like short stories that kind of are the same universe, and they all
Mm-hmm.
kind of fit together like puzzle pieces. Some of them are a little bit more fragmented. Some of them are pretty polished. I was working on this novelization of an compilation of these interlocking stories that would be like Sin City. And once you're done, you kind of see the world of what happened through different adventures of different characters. And then in the main story, you'd have Sugar's kind of the thread going through all of them. Um, and then on a couple of other books, she's kind of an ancillary character that shows up here and there, but isn't the main characters of other
Mhm.
adventures. So I have a bunch of different characters to build with this world. She's just kind of the main. She's the the core of the world because of her particular journey. It might destroy the world, or it might
Mhm.
save it, or it might do a massive change, an epochal change to what happens to Lost Peaks. And then there's some other stuff going on underneath that isn't particularly her doing, just just part of the world, you know. So
Yeah, I mean, that's the way you describe it. She seems like the archetypical, at least serial pulp character. Just wandering from one adventure to the next.
exactly. She has some superpowers, if you want to call them that. If we want to get into that, she has a backstory of why she is, well, what she is, and that somebody is calling me. Off. Give me a moment.
All right.
That really annoyed me. All right, I turned off my phone. Apologies to the chat and anybody else who was listening. Uh, and I don't want to get too much into that because it goes kind of into her history and
Mhm.
other things. But then when she encounters X, he teaches her. It takes her a while to learn his trade, as it were, and then she kind of learns her own style. So every great martial artist or great warrior learns their own style, how they will deal with things, and that is her. And one of the things she gleans from her own journey that way is she can see auras. And then the last thing is through a series of circumstance or maybe fate, she is bonded with the sliver of a cosmic entity that has entered into her world through some. Well, I'm not going to get too much into that, but it enters into her world and then bonds with her and gives her basically access to um, cosmic power. I guess is the best way to put it that way. So she becomes very overpowered at one point, and then she has to deal with her own mental problems, which she does. She's on the edge of lucidity and the edge of sanity at times, and it's only when she loses her grip on sanity that overpowered stuff comes into play, and then she can cause real havoc um, until she kind of controls herself.
Kind of
So
like a
that's
superpowered Harley Quinn sort of thing.
very, very similar. People often say, "Is she Harley Quinn? She got the pigtails and so forth," and I'm like, "No, Harley's like a walking joke. Sugar is no joke.
Mhm.
Um, Sugar could destroy Harley."
Oh yeah, I mean without a doubt.
And I'm not trying to make light of Harley Quinn as a character. Harley Quinn is a great character. Bruce Timm, and the other fella, forget his name. They did a great job in making a character that has lasted for 25 years now. But Sugar is not her, although there are elements that could be considered similar. I will grant that.
Are you ever going to? You mentioned in the description that not only was this a novelization to begin with, but are you? It seems to me that you kind of insinuating that you are going to publish the novelizations or the prose works in the future, or is it Little Girl Lethal going to just stay like a comic series?
Well, I'm gonna let me kind of address that.
Okay.
I was starting off to do a novelization. That's how I met Matt Whiskey Paint, who was my core artist here. Yeah, I don't know if people can see the wraparound cover, but anything you look on the camp page for Indiegogo, that's basically most of that is him. And I did some illustrations for those stories compiled together, called Little Girl Lethal. And at one point, I thought, well, maybe I can do a standalone comic book to go with this, as kind of a, incentive to people to buy, that sort of thing. And then, not to get too off the point, but when they made Kappa Nazi, I got real interested in what was going in comics again, because that annoyed me, because that was part of my childhood.
Mhm.
And then I discovered different commentators, and got involved in what a lot of people would say is Comicsgate, but I've never really aligned completely with the label. But I definitely have principles and values that are core and are salient for that. Then I said, everybody knows Richard C. Meyer, Zach, from Diversity in Comics, or Comics Matter as it is now. He said he was going to do a comic, and so and he just kind of was talking about it pie in the sky. And September 17th of 2017, I decided, well, after consulting with Whiskey Paint, we could do a comic. I think we have the capabilities, and it's turned out that we do. Whiskey Paint has done very beautiful pages, and I think I'm a fairly good writer. Uh, and hopefully we can get that done soon. There are some stumbling blocks currently to getting it completely done as I had promised. A secondary story that needs to be finished with artwork. But yeah, that was kind of the path that I came to, going from a novelization to kind of a comic book story. However, like anybody knows who reads novels as opposed to comics, novels are far more dense. They have a lot more um, inside people's heads, and
Mhm.
a lot of the stuff that you have to cut for comic books is in the novelization. And I still want to do the novelization as well as the comic book, but I'm kind of embroiled right now in getting this done. So um, writing for that is, even though I still do it, it's taken a backseat. And anybody who knows writing for novelization, editorial is truly the worst part about it. I mean, you get the stories down, but then getting them polished the way you want them and how they fit together and all this other business. Making it all work together, so it's not boring people to death. Sometimes I get the feeling that I should have been born in a different century, because I write sometimes like Victor Hugo,
Huh.
and I need to pull back and get the razor out and cut out things.
Yeah, just trim the fat, so to speak.
Well, comics has really helped me do that, because when you're doing this stuff, everything's visual. It's total visual medium, and when you do captions or dialogue, those are kind of like icing on top of the cake. They add a little depth, but the story should be able to be understood generally through the images and the flow of the panels.
Hmm.
At least that's how I look at it. So.
And let's see here. Menhiro-chan, where can I buy this book? Wondering where to buy this book? It's Indiegogo right now. I believe it's
Yep.
still available, isn't it?
It's in demand currently. Yeah, you can go pick up this book if you feel the need. Again, it's a mature book. This is not for children. You don't want to leave this out on a coffee table if you have young kids. When you get it, and hopefully that's sooner than later. Just letting you know. I often say it. Put it up on your top shelf with your Cohibas and your 12-year-old Scotch, where all good things are, and keep it there. Unless you want to pull it down for mixed company.
That's an excellent place to put it. And the link to the Indiegogo is in the description if you want to check it out. And there are several tiers to choose from. I believe some of the tiers are offering digital, so
Yes.
will be available in digital, correct?
Yes, I put that there. I mean, I know a lot of people say they shouldn't do digital, but I believe that you're in another part of the world, or you don't have the kind of money that it takes to do one of the higher tiers. I'll put that there for you. So if you put $5 down, you'll get the book when we get it compiled. That that's something I just want for people if they want to do it. I know they say, "Oh, it's going to be pirated," and I'm like, "Well, once I put it out there anyway, somebody has a scanner, and it's going to be pirated."
Oh yeah, I mean,
I
there's
don't
no way
like
to
it.
stop pirating.
Yeah, I don't like it, but that's the world we live in, and trying to stop it is, it's like Sisyphus. So there you go.
But I have seen for writers and people who create creative works, pirating usually kind of helps in the long run. People just, I don't want to pay for this, so I'm going to get a pirated version and say, oh, I love this. Actually, I'm going to support this guy's next work. So I mean,
Yeah.
it can be. It's like a double-edged sword. Pirating, of course, officially you shouldn't do it, but it does. Sometimes it can help you out pretty good if you are. If people tend to like it and they're not sure about it. They see like they pirate it, read through it for a free version of it, and then the next one comes out. That's a bonus of this being a serial, or this being something that's going to be serialized. It seems
Right,
that
right.
I got your first one for free. I pirated your first one, but I really like it, so I'm going to support your next one.
Well, the dream would be to finish off the saga, the Sugar Saga, and it will be a little bit different um, in its kind of consistency, the way it's laid out, because it's a different medium than the novelization.
Mm.
So that would give you reason to buy the novel as opposed to the graphic novel once I get it all compiled into, say, a trade paperback. And then, I'd love, say, in the future when, and this is a couple of years from now, because it takes time to produce the pages and to gather the funds and so forth. To do something, say, like I don't know if anybody got Bigfoot Bill. I did not back that, and I've been kicking myself ever since because it's such a beautiful what Doug Knaple did with that book. That's what I'd like to do, a hardback book with some beautiful embossed like gold leafing when everything's all put together, and hopefully, and if somebody has got introduced to it by somehow they got a PDF, and then they want to get a super nice book in the end. I hope they do. As it stands right now, I'm going to try to do the best book I can. It'll be perfect bound because it's going to be around 80 pages with the gallery and the two stories. And I'm going to try to make the best paper, both cover and interior, and the best, obviously, the best quality printing. So I'm hoping that when people get the book in their hands, they'll understand why there was a wait, and they'll be happy with what they get as a product.
Yeah, you put your whole heart to something, put a lot of passion into it. I mean, there's going to be people will see that. I mean, there's a big. That's why there's such a big difference between these independent creators who are coming out with their own comic versus the people who are producing comics for Marvel. I mean, they don't see any passion from them. They don't really seem to like or respect the work or the art. They just seem to be hashing out their petty differences and their petty their petty things, arguments they get on Twitter. Like if they one of these Marvel creators gets into it with someone on Twitter, they're the next villain on the next comic. So there's no passion there. It's just things that they feel like doing so they can get a paycheck or just fill up their resume. Whereas opposed to the indie creators coming out right now, there's lots of passion. You can see this in Meyer's work. You can see this in Ethan Van Sciver's work. You can see this pretty much in everyone who's coming out right now with their own comic. It's just a lot of passion, hard work, and just overall enjoyment in the creation of everything.
It is extremely hard, but it is extremely fulfilling to make something that is all yours. I mean, with the caveat that
Mhm.
I'm working with an artist, and we're 50-50 partners. But I mean, he adds so much. Obviously, I'm selling this book on his art that comes from kind of the stuff that's in my head. But he adds so many little things that I would have never thought of to do. And when we get stuff put together, it's a long, hard slog to get there. But I'm just waiting for the day I can get the books in my hands and then get them out to the people who backed me and fulfill that. And then at that point, basically, I can say not only am I a comic book professional, I'm also an author in a way, even
Mhm.
though it is a graphic novel. Not to disparage the medium at all, but yeah. And I think that it's something that if you want to do it, know that it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and money, and it takes a little bit of foresight. I've made some missteps along the way. Uh, just a hint for those who might be trying: when you are doing shipping, make sure you do a large number for your shipping internationally. I didn't do that, and it's probably going to come and bite me right in the ass.
Yeah,
So
that's what I've heard a lot from people who are shipping internationally. Is that
mhm,
that's
yeah,
the big one. That's the big
that's
one
the
right
big one.
there.
Usually, you can get away with like $10 for domestic and you'll be all right. It's right now, it's basically, it's 17 to 25 and usually 25, depending on the country. And people, when they look at that and they're like, oh, I just bought a, $20 book, and then it's $25 shipping to wherever they're going, and that's just the reason it is. It's the marketplace today. So it's really sad, and I hate that I'd have to do that, but the next one I do, I'm definitely running. It's a good thing I have good credit. Let's put it that way.
And one thing I wanted to go back to was the digital, the philosophy of creating digital. Because it seems to be like a taboo among people, at least among the Comicsgate crowd. Because Richard C. Meyer,
Yeah,
he put that into place that he personally doesn't want to do digital, and from there it kind of like disseminated into the other creators that they don't want to do digital either. But I believe in digital because I'm not, this might not come to surprise to you, but I read a lot, and
no, really, that's shocking.
and the Amazon Kindle has been an absolute blessing. I mean, before I got the Kindle, I have nowhere to put my books. I'm running out of space. I have to buy I have to buy another house. But
Like DVDs and books, I probably got about 5,000 books around my house, and I,
mhm.
shelves full of it. I get it. I mean, and then you can put the entire library in your hand.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
really
it's,
cool.
and I can take it with me. I
Yeah,
just take it so I just can have my Kindle with me. I can say, what do I want to read today? It's just a library in your hand. So I really respect, I really believe in the digital format, especially if people want to, if you're emphasizing reading as part of the comic experience. Because I mean, with a physical copy, yeah, it's fun. You can read it, you can collect it, you can put it on a shelf. It's very nice to have it. You can have a signed copy. It's more valuable. But I mean, sometimes you might lose it. It might get destroyed. And you can't always take these physical copies with you everywhere. And with the digital format, you can have several copies of it. You can have a little copy of it, take it with you on your laptop. Oh, you lose your laptop, you can have, if you have it backed up, it's not lost.
yeah.
You
Just
still have the copy with you.
I completely agree, and to let everybody know, if you do get a hard copy, you also get the digital copy with it. There are two versions. There's the modest and the immodest. The modest is kind of, I don't know if it's PG-13, probably PG-16, but it's, the naughty bits are covered up. Let's just put it that way. And then the immodest version is the full Monty. Um, so you'll have both of those copies uh, come to you as a PDF along with your book. So I hope everybody's willing to, not pirate too much, but it'll be out there, and once the books are all disseminated. Anyway, sorry, I got you off your flow, man.
No problem. I mean, it's all right. Just do it. Jump in wherever you want to. But I think if I remember correctly, now I backed this a while ago, okay, so I can't remember specifically, but I think I did. I think I backed it at $20 tier, which is the very immodest proposal tier.
Yeah, that's the
Uh,
modest version.
a lot of interesting things in there, including like an MP3. Uh,
Yeah,
so yeah, I'm real excited to get this, especially because I really love Sin City. I love Frank Miller's work. I mean, his dialogue in Sin City is absolutely pristine. That's other than the violence. It's probably my favorite part of Sin City was in the characterization, the violence, and then the absolutely wonderful dialogue. I mean, he's a master of it, at least in
yeah.
Sin City.
I'm hoping that I can come a fraction of his kind of punchy dialogue. I mean, he knows how to twist a phrase and a word that really adds to the image that he would put down. And I'm hoping, I think I'm a good writer, but a man's got to know his limitations, I guess is kind of what I'm saying. However, I've studied all this stuff for a long time. I've read these books over and over and over. Not to say I'm going to be, taking his dialogue or anybody else's, but I'm going to try to rise my water to their level. Let's put it that way.
It's always a good idea to shoot for the stars. I mean, even if
Yeah,
you don't think you might reach their greatness, if you're a big fan of Alan Moore, one of the greats, then try to do what he did. Try to emulate his greatness, and even if you don't make it, you still come out probably with something quality,
yeah,
incredibly high quality. And I'm not sure if you know this specifically, but anyone who's watched me recently probably knows that I'm coming out with a comic of my own, Doctor Alpha, and
nice.
I have been going over what I'm going to do with the Indiegogo, what I'm going to offer, and I have decided to offer the comic digitally, and and there's a tier for both digital and physical. So yeah, that's because that's how much I believe in the this digital era, how much digital can mean to people, and maybe some people can't really afford the shipping. Maybe some people can't really afford that. So I mean, the digital it's a digital only, and it's still a little up there, but it is still available. It's not as costly. There's no shipping costs or anything like that.
Nope.
So I'm going to be fully embracing digital, and it's going to be wonderful, I think.
I think that it's a great idea. I know that there are people out there like Zach who eschew digital, but I think that you want to get it as broad a marketplace as you can. And $5 at least for me. And people are like, why did you do it so low? And I'm like, it's bits. It's unless you get some physical in your hand, $5 is okay. I'm okay with that. Uh, Strangely enough, I had a $1 tier. If you get the $1, you get the. I haven't told anybody so I'm just telling you on this show for the first time. If you put $1 down, you will get the immodest version for free. If you buy a $5, you'll get the immodest and the modest version.
Oh,
I mean, excuse you get the modest version for free for the $1.
first
So
edition exclusive.
first edition exclusive, exactly. So those are, and I think that's kind of fun. People are like, well, that's kind of throwaway, and I'm like, well, I don't think so. I think that this is going to build, and people will want the second one as soon as I can deliver. And I don't want to try to do the next book until I've delivered this book. And it's been such a long journey for this. I want to be able to do it and say that I accomplished it.
Right. I think it's a good way to go for anyone who's coming out with their first comic. I think it's a way to build up trust. That's what I'm going to do. I have a lot of ideas for other comics, including a Doctor Alpha sequel. I have like 5 more sequels ready to go for Doctor Alpha alone, and then I have several other characters and new other series that I want to produce potentially in the future. But as for this first go around, I'm just going to have this out, fulfill it, and just not have no other campaigns out there until this is done and completely done. People have everything in their hands and all that good stuff. Just so one, I won't be overwhelmed with how many things I have to produce,
Right.
and then two, so that people know that it's coming and that it is going to be a done deal. That I can uphold my promises.
Exactly. You have the exact idea what
Mm.
I'm talking about.
Yes, I mean that's a really good strategy to go. Just prove to your audience that you can deliver. Prove to them that you can deliver not only the actual product, but a good story. Get them, they have a little taste for what you're able to produce and the type of writing and story that you're able to produce, and what kind of things they can expect from you. But after that, maybe you can run 2 campaigns at once. But I know people got onto that. I got onto Richard Meyer for that because he opened up Jawbreakers. He did excellent on that, and then he opened up
Ironsides.
yeah, Ironsides, because I got that one too. I just forgot what the name was, but yeah, he opened up Ironsides, and then they said, I don't want to back this because you haven't fulfilled your first one, and so yeah, I can see where they're coming from. I can really see where they're coming from, and that's one thing
Well,
I might have critiqued him on a little bit, but
well,
yeah.
that's fine. I want to fulfill for one reason. I do have an idea that, like I said, I have multiple characters, and I'd love to put them in the hands of other people, and let them play with them, and
Mhm.
then do like a compendium of different characters, say like 2000 AD, in
Mhm.
that idea. Um, but I can't do that until I deliver this book, start the second episode, and then maybe I can think about doing another campaign that would be similar to in the same universe, but other things going on within Lost Peaks, and I don't want to do that until this is finally in people's hands and they're like, I'm enthused about what I see. Let's move forward.
Right. And I'd be up for that. If you have that opening, I'll be up for writing some story from in this universe using some of the characters or something.
We can talk, man, and it will be paid work. I'm not one of those people that thinks that people should do things pro bono. Um, I but again, that's coming up with the money.
Mhm.
I like I said, I have fairly good credit, and I'm not a pauper, but
Yeah.
I'm not I'm no king. So
No Ethan Van Sciver either,
I'm no Ethan Van
huh?
Sciver. I'm no Doug TenNapel. And I bravo for their accomplishments. They set the standard and the bar for all of us
Mhm.
to strive for, and that's something that's cool. I think that Brian Polito in the same way as well. Um, I want to achieve that kind of success if I can. I do realize that the nature of my books may limit it things. I'm not an all ages book. If you want to do 4 quadrant, you'd probably be better off shooting for that in general if you want to make a huge success. Well, that's what Doug TenNapel says. That's why his stuff is fairly all ages. And just to throw that out there for anybody's listening and maybe want to do that. Every time you put it in to the R-rated or maybe the mature category, you limit your audience a
Mhm.
little bit. And but it's not to say that you shouldn't do it. If you have passion for it, then do that and go at it balls to the wall wholeheartedly. But also do your legwork. Like I said, before I pulled the trigger on this campaign, which is getting on to be 9 months ago. Um, I I did over a year of kind of promoting on Twitter and getting on people's streams and talking like this and letting people know what was coming and showing artwork that Whiskey Pen had produced. And we got pages done. I'd say get at least 5 or 6 pages done if you want to do this. And then, take your time to construct your campaign page and do your research about how you're going to approach it. And then when you pull the trigger, it's like another job. Don't think of it as something you do in your spare time. It's not. During that like month to 2 months period, really go at it and believe in it. Like if you don't believe in your project, no one else will. So just a little bit more advice.
Yeah, I mean, there some people are actually just looking for this sort of mature content, like works that aren't afraid to go that route. This have an
Without being like
immodest, yeah,
full on porn, yeah.
yeah. I mean,
I mean,
there's a
and I
difference between porn and and something like
well, and
this.
like a lot of people will say you're just doing a porn book, and I'm like, okay, if you think that nudity is porn, but I mean, there are a lot of classical things are nude, so
Yeah, there's a lot of
um,
works that include nudity and have very sexual in nature, but
yeah,
are not porn.
and there's a difference between, in my opinion, eroticism and blatant pornography. Blatant pornography is there just to get one reaction, whereas
Mm.
eroticism, I think, has multiple layers to it. Lady Chatterley's Lover is a very well constructed book, very well written, although it has some lascivious portions to it, or a lot of it. But it's different than, say, just some sort of Tijuana Bible,
Right.
something like that.
I mean, a lot of pulps when they came out. I mean, they had a lot of eroticism in there also, just to attract that sort of reader and people who are interested in that, and when some readers are interested in that,
Hmm.
and it wasn't porn. It was just part of the aesthetic that they chose, a part of the genre. There is a
Sure.
genre fit for people who are looking for something of substance, like detective or a revenge story that isn't afraid to go the erotic route. And
Right.
there's a
Vamps
big
and stuff
audience.
like
There's a
that.
big audience for that. Not only is there an audience for that, there's a dedicated audience for that.
Mhm.
Some people are looking specifically for that kind of story. So it might limit your audience, but you are also unlocking a whole new audience.
Yeah. I mean, even like let's go back to like Edgar Rice Burroughs, John Carter of Mars, Princess of Mars. Everybody on Mars, and it doesn't ever give any sort of caveats to this. It says they wear like a breastplate kind of thing,
Mhm.
but everybody runs around naked. Now, to me, that seems fairly impractical. But I mean, and maybe from his time period, naked means um, in your skivvies or whatever. But that's how a lot of people envision that. If you go to Frazetta's artwork, which has kind of informed that genre a lot, like both Conan and like Edgar Rice Burroughs and many other things. He does that lush, voluptuous, fecund, uh, sexuality that's there,
Mhm.
the sensual stuff, and And it really does speak to, and I think it's sad that today a lot of people, because of quote unquote, like, toxic masculinity and the fearsome male gaze, they're trying to curtail the beauty of femininity for some reason. I don't understand that, and you see it all through comics
That's
currently.
where Carl Manvers came from, because they took away all her feminine features and just made her
Or
like a
or
dude with short
She-Hulk,
hair. Oh
like
man, She-Hulk. I thought that was the Hulk. Like I seriously thought that was the Hulk with long
uh,
hair.
that last Avengers is like, okay.
And then they have Blade hitting on her. I mean, this is not a character that people want to see. These are just characters portrayed by people who want to be lazy and not work or improve themselves and then still be held as a hero. They want to eat donuts and grow fatter in their seats, just peruse Twitter all day, and then be treated as a hero for doing so. They don't want
Right.
to go through the fact that if you look at the first Marvel stories, you see that these heroes, they don't stay normal. I mean, they don't just sit around and then become heroes. They usually undergo some sort of drastic change, or they some sort of suffering, and they earn their heroism by good deeds or just strength of character. They don't just sit around all day and then expect to be worshipped for it. That's what normal people do. That's what not even normal people. That's what sub-average people do. Normal
Yeah.
people are at least going out and working, or at least maybe hitting the gym every once in a while, or trying to improve or their life in some way, or at least trying to stay above water. These people who are just wanting to, they leech off other people. They just sit around and do whatever they want with no regard for anyone else and no respect for the art that they are ruining. That they just want to do what they want to indulge fully and completely in their own little stupid fantasies and be worshipped for it. And that's me
I,
holding back a lot. So
I
that,
can
that
I
is
can hear your frustration, and I feel it. I feel you. Let me tell you, I often think that they think that they're putting the humanity in the character. They're not. They're what they're doing is just stewing in their own banal mundanity. Which nobody wants to read that. Nobody. I don't understand this idea of like constantly putting superheroes in coffee shops, um, or sitting around or lounging. They're not doing what superheroes should do.
Oh yeah, oh
I
yeah.
mean, there's a time for the trough and valley, but when you spend an entire episode with trough and maybe one slight peak where somebody gets Nazi gets punched or something, uh, you're not making art. You're destroying art, in my opinion. But like you were saying, when you see characters with decades of legacy just torn to shreds or um, morphed into something that they've never been, because people think it's interesting to deconstruct a character and to you know explore their own um, personally I think their own psyche, their own psychosis, and then project that onto the character that they're working with.
Yeah,
I
they,
mean,
they call it deconstruction. It's not deconstruction. It's just
yeah,
totally ruining and changing these characters.
right.
Just hide it behind the term deconstruction. But they have no idea what that word means.
Well, I mean, something deconstructed is I mean,
Yeah,
let's
that's
look at
interesting.
say, well, Tarantino has been doing that for years. He's
Oh yeah.
deconstructed the linear story, which was done before. I mean, you had things like Sunset Boulevard and that sort of ilk, where they have the timeline a little bit messed up, but then he did it in such a way that was kind of a watermark, of a benchmark for a lot of people to say, well, I can tell a story in a different way, but still have an arc. I mean, when you watch Pulp Fiction or when you watch
Mhm.
Reservoir Dogs, there is an arc there. It's just constructed in a different way. Whereas you get some of these books you have now, I don't see any arc at all. And if I do see an arc, I don't see a heroic arc. The Mariko Tamaki, and I don't like to pull people out and chastise them, but her She-Hulk was just a clinic in like how to become depressed, you know, and and watch YouTube cooking channel. And just I don't understand it. And she got praised by a lot of people. It seems like a lot of these people, the self validation, or like everybody's validating each other in a grand circle jerk, which is now the Eisners apparently. Um,
And the
I don't
Hugos.
and the Hugos as
Yeah,
well.
that was sad. I because I've always wanted a Hugo.
And the Oscars in many ways.
Hmm.
Um, these shows have become watered down and made themselves illegitimate in many ways because they don't see anything of that's truly of value and merit based on meritocracy. And they just kind of whatever is the trend of the day of the current zeitgeist is what informs how they give out these awards. And again, like I don't even care if this book got out there and somebody nominated it for an Eisner. I'd be like, okay, I really would, because I would never plan on going. I'm not going to go there and possibly have somebody call me a um, misogynist or an objectifier.
Hmm.
I'm like, of course, beautiful women are things of aesthetic objects, but they're still people, right? And attraction is never going to go away. It's how we're hardwired. So trying to get rid of that is just, again, it's Sisyphean, but not only is it Sisyphean, it's stupidity. It's not a noble pursuit.
Hmm.
I want my characters to be attractive, even if they are monstrous. I want them to be in some way compelling. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a compelling plus this, especially if they're monstrous. I mean, there's always that trope of having the monstrous being be having an alluring exterior, and you
Hmm.
see that in it goes way back
Vampires.
to the pulp era, the femme fatales. They have their own agendas. They might be evil or villainous in some way, but they are femme fatales because they have that attractive exterior.
This is true. I mean, and we see it over and over and over through the best noir. You'll have monstrous like interiors. The exteriors are very, very much the succubus, or
Right.
the
Right.
incubus, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, it could be either one. I mean, it could be a handsome man, or it could be a beautiful woman. And going back to the subject of respect, which these common, these mainstream comics, or legacy comics, the people they have writing legacy comics lack completely, is that,
Mm.
and I have no shame saying this, and that I used to myself write fan fiction when I was in high school and
I've
before
done
that.
pastiche. I
Yeah,
think every good writer has.
yeah, I mean, I think I've talked about this before on a previous stream or somewhere, but I actually encourage people to write fan fiction, and not the weirdo kind where you just just writing out your debauched fantasies or erotic, where
Yeah, yeah. Like,
but like actually, if you're writing a story, if you're centering on characterization and story, one thing, if you're playing in someone else's playground, so to speak, that
mm,
it's very essential for you to respect the art you are playing around with. And that's why I always did. I made sure to respect the characters, respect the story, and respect the setting. And I did that to such a degree that the comments I got back were that I can't believe these characters that you've written. I mean, these characters seem like they are acting like they would on the show. And that's personally what I believe. That's why I bring up this subject of fan fiction, is that because you are playing with someone else's characters, you're playing with someone else's setting, like these Marvel writers are doing these days, that they're
mm.
playing with legacy characters that they did not create and they do not own and do not respect, and that's why that's what really gets on my nerves, and in that respect, this is mainly my main problem with these new Marvel comics, is that they have absolutely no respect for the art and the creators who created these characters originally. And that's what you should be doing. It's not only is fan fiction good practice to writing your own stories and to create your own characters without the baggage of being a Mary Sue, and it helps you develop and learn to create storylines, plot lines, and characters. But it also teaches you respect. Teaches you how to respect the art that you are playing with.
Well, I have done pastiche before. One specifically, I did just for fun. I did like 25 chapters of a Barsoom adventure with like a new whole cloth character, and then I incorporated other characters into it. And he definitely wasn't a Mary Sue or Marty Stew. But he was. I again, you go to Barsoom
Mhm.
and you're from Earth, you tend to have a little bit more juice, at least initially. and and he was bouncing around, and he had his own. He went to his own corner of Barsoom, and I kind of came up with the environments and the city and a whole bunch of other things, and it really helped me learn how to worldcraft by you know standing on the shoulders of
Mhm.
Burroughs.
Oh yeah.
And then again, I'm informing that same character with stuff I got from excuse me from Robert E. Howard, and also from Lovecraft, and
Mhm.
also from writer as well, Haggard, the
Oh yeah,
guy who
yeah,
did
yeah.
Quartermain. Uh, I was picking stuff from each one of those guys and then incorporating into my pastiche, and then other stuff, of course. And when I got done, I was very happy with it. And I may someday, when if I live so long and all the everything's in public domain, I may release it, like, because I have characters and elements from the whole timeline of Barsoom that Burroughs did. So right now I'm waiting another, what, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, that's gonna be really fun. That'd be really fun. The public domain is always fun to play with, so it's really interesting when something interesting enters something you love enters the public domain. Like I think people are waiting for Batman to enter the public domain in
Yeah,
another like
I'm not
20,
sure
30
how they're
years.
going to do that. I'm sure that Warner Brothers and Viacom are going to figure something out. I'd love to see that. I mean, but how are you ever going to play around with Mickey Mouse? Because now Disney's basically made it their logo.
I know,
So who knows? But it would, it won't last forever. Say like
Mhm.
200 years from now,
Right?
they'll have it. But I mean, we'll long be gone unless they figure some sort of scientific way to
It's
keep
an
our
immortal
senses.
immortality elixir or
That's right.
something.
Keep our telomeres, popping on the end.
And one thing I'm interested in is that I've heard Meyer, and he also talks about pulps. I mean, not really pulps, but he also likes John Carter of Mars specifically.
He does.
And I'm hearing a lot of
But
people talk about.
he didn't like it before me. I'll tell you that. I was long before that boy.
Yeah, I bet
He
so.
talked about like taking a long time to read the first 5 books. I went for the first 11 books when I was 12 in about a week. So
He made a video on it, which surprised me because he seems more of a comic guy, not really of a novel reading kind of guy, which
yeah,
is
he
not bad.
definitely,
But I mean, he seems more like a
yeah,
comic person.
I think his attention span is a little bit, it's a little shorter than some, and that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, he goes on about how he takes him like a week to watch a movie because he watches little pieces at a time. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but one thing I heard is that I mean, people talk about the pulps, and everyone likes Burroughs, but no one, I don't, and maybe some Lovecraft, but some people usually just mention Howard a little bit. But I'm more of a Howard guy. He's my number one. Robert E.
Well,
Howard. He's my number
Howard,
one.
he's one of the ones, and I'm sorry to cut you off.
No problem.
Um, Howard is the one guy that if I go into the afterlife and I meet him, I'm gonna bitch slap him so hard for killing himself.
Oh yeah.
Because, and I think he probably was bipolar.
Oh
I
yeah.
get that feeling about him because his output was such an immense output for the short time he actually was writing. Um, and then to think of what could have been, his turns of phrase and his descriptions and the worlds that he creates with his words,
And that's
you
why I
can
love him the
see them.
most. That's why I love him the most because the way he can word craft, the way he crafted these descriptions, it was colossal in my
Yeah.
view.
And we're not just talking the famous characters, but a lot of his side stories. He
Hmm.
wrote for a whole bunch of different
Hmm.
publications. And he
Hmm.
wrote in almost every genre too,
Oh
like
yeah, I
romance and Western
think he did
and
boxing too.
comedy, boxing, like crime. I mean, he was all over the map, and all of them are pretty good. And for me, like for me to write like that, like I'm a researcher and I think out stuff, and you can just feel that it just came out of him. It was like the water flowing out of his brain, and
Hmm.
he put it down on paper. And a lot of people said that he'd do like up to 3 drafts, and then he was done. And I'm like, how? It makes me kind of discourage a little bit because like I'm like just 3, like did the initial, kind of did a little this thing, and then added bells and whistles, and that was it.
I'm surprised he did that many. I mean, I'm not really surprised with Howard specifically, but usually in pulp, the pulp writers they are the pioneers, of course, of the turning writing into from an art to more of a science. and but that they were under such pressure to produce
Yeah.
because they didn't eat unless they produced something publishable. So they actually perfected the technique of just doing it all perfect in one draft. That's why they
Yeah.
came up with like formulas and everything. So
Well, and yeah, Burroughs was known for his formulaic stuff.
mhm.
In fact, it kind of got a little pedantic after a little while once you've read a lot of his stuff. But he still had great, he had great prose, and so it wasn't too bad. But Howard was different. Like each one of them, he'd come up with these crazy kind of situations and worlds and characters that have stood the test of time. That sometimes I wonder if I could come up with something equally as potent, over decades, maybe centuries.
And the funny thing about that is, you as the writer, you never know. I mean, some writers have reported to like they say, "I'm just going to do this one thing, and it's not going to be that great. It's just something I need to do, or something I just want to try." And then that something becomes this epic, classic title that is forever attached to their name, and it lasts throughout the centuries or the or it's decades, or yeah, I guess sometimes even centuries. I think what Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, that was
Yeah,
done as just a fun little contest. I mean, she her husband Percy Shelley, and I forgot the third guy. I forgot the third
yeah,
guy. I
that was
forgot.
during the year without a summer,
Mhm.
and they got stuck in a place in the middle
Yeah.
of a winter of summer, and they uh they were trying to keep themselves busy, and
Mhm.
she wrote this literal masterpiece that has informed
I just
so
imagine
much.
being like like in a creative writing class, and just we're just going to write stories and compare. And then one of them becomes a classic that lasts through the ages. It helps define an entire genre.
Yeah,
That's kind of what happened.
and she was not the great writer. There was a poet, two poets there, and she penned this opus that how many versions and how many things have split off from that idea.
Mhm.
Anybody ever gives this idea that women are less than men, I don't think that. I actually think they're better at novelization sometimes than men are, um, in many ways, because they have this kind of feeling thing that they do. Um, to give you an example, there's a Regency writer. Her name's Georgette Heyer. She's passed away, but my mother's like into that shit. And I read one of her books, just because my mom wanted me to read it, and it wasn't my thing, but I could see how well written it was.
Mhm.
And these series of novels that she wrote have continued to sell long after her death. And people, just like Jane Austen or something like that. And I can see them. Sorry, I went off on a whole tangent
No
about
problem.
women writers, but um, when I see something of quality, I like try to remember it and put a little pin in it.
Mhm.
And that's one of my like I okay. I read one more of hers just because it had a cool Pistols for Two, and it turned out pretty good. I like that one. So everyone go look. Georgette Heyer, Pistols for Two.
Here's a good question by the board enthusiast. What advice do you give for good world building outside of practicing with fan fiction? Do you have any idea or advice on that subject?
From me or from you?
For you. Well, I'll let you go first. Then I'll.
Well, I mean, I've gone to several, well, writing. They have not conventions, but conferences, and then I have a writers group, and so I kind of use them as sounding board. And then I read a lot of stuff. So they often say, if you're going to write, you better read. So reading is very important, and reading classics and reading the type of material that you want to write is also helps you. Um, to come up with ideas about how you're going to world build. Now, some people get lost in the world building and
Mhm.
they kind of don't address the kind of the human aspect, because you can really, I mean, with Lost Peaks, I've done a lot of things that will never make it into a manuscript, because it's just kind of notes, like when you talk about Tolkien, he had all these extra notes that now have been made into like subsequent books, um, that informed the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, and then I guess the similarity. I always can't say that. Silmarillion. God. Anyway,
Similarian?
there we go. Didn't come into my head. But this is something, when you're world building, you want to start with a premise or an idea, and then let it kind of grow organically. And I know that kind of might seem like a cliche word, but if you're thinking like with Lost Peaks, I started out with well, where would be an interesting place to build a city um, that maybe was under the onus of the sort of Damocles or Doom? Because I had watched a TV show back a long time ago that talked about cities in the United States that were under threat of like a natural disaster, which
Mhm.
are Seattle, San Francisco, and New Orleans. Um, and then and they kind of told you why, and I'm not going to get into that, but I wanted to think of a different place, and I thought, well, what's the most dangerous place in our country? And well, the most dangerous place in our country literally is Yellowstone. If it ever goes off, basically, where I live and a good portion of the country is just toast, right? Completely. But how would you want to build something on top of that? Well, a lot of people know that around a lot of volcanic areas, there's you can mine and stuff, and there's different things that you can find because of pressures and so forth. So I came with this idea that there were veins of gold all through thrown up for the last from the last eruption of this volcano. And it's a vast volcano, like 100 miles long, 50 miles wide, which makes the valley. And then the mountains, I was like, well, and I don't know, this isn't probably geologically sound for an idea, but that throw up of Earth made these titanic mountains that were bigger than the Himalayas in their prominence. And so this is kind of how I got the visuals. And then I thought, well, what would happen if you had these families that had just kind of unlimited funds? What would they do? What would they build? And you've seen this throughout, monumental architecture throughout history. They built things like the pyramids and the Tower of Babel or whatever you want to use. Well, extrapolate that and then exaggerate that, and you've got Lost Peaks, which is um, like Tokyo from Akira, New York
Mhm.
from Fifth Element, Los Angeles from Blade Runner, and kind of mash them all together, and you get Lost Peaks, this huge city glittering because with opulence, but underneath it's all this corruption. And then as you go down, because they've mined into the earth, um, for all the stuff to build all this, there are great catacombs and labyrinths that go down even close to the mantle. So that kind of gives you kind of your D&D like dungeons
Right.
that run underneath the city, and that's where the slums are of the city that you don't see. And so that's how I built my world in a way. And then I could get more extrapolating out into like the broader world about how there are five main huge empires that are vying at this time for global hegemony. But I'm not going to go that far. But that's how these things build out. And I could tell you about the union that Lost Peaks, the nation of Lost Peaks, is part of a, a union of nations. Um, and how they're constructed, and they make one of the empires, and each one of the nations within that kind of have their own culture, um, similar to like you go from state to state in the United States. There's a difference in the culture, but these are marked differences in their cultures. Yet they have a cohesion, at least in this time, under their union like charter, a constitutional charter. So that's how I built my world. And I don't know if that helps, but that's you're taking parts and pieces, and it takes
Mhm.
time. You have to cognitate on it and think of what would be a logical progression. I mean, and how would that inform the characters, and how would that inform the environment, and and extrapolate that out. How would that inform the world? And then you start to have this kind of vision in your head that now if you can relate that onto paper or to your artists so that they can do the art, or you can do the art, then you really got something, and then people will gravitate that to from your own passion for your own world that you've created in your head, kind of like Tolkien's Leaf by Nigel, if
Mhm.
anybody's ever read that.
And that's what I think is a really good piece of advice for world building. Is that you see this a lot with fantasy and sci-fi authors. They kind of get lost in how grand their world is and how detailed every part of the world is, that they kind of forget to write the actual story.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's what you did was good. I mean, that's how you're supposed to do it. Just little by little, start with an idea, and then just grow it little by little as you continue to write stories within that world.
Right.
Now, with me, I just when I want to, the way I world build is that I start with a story first, and I add on to the world. I add realities and facts, organizations, and little truths about the world as the story progresses, just for the sake of drama. So if you need if I need someone to be assassinated or something, for example, maybe I might make a organization that is living in the shadows that specializes in assassinating people, and the person gets assassinated. Then we go off to the next adventure. Okay, who is this league or something, or that's something that if I get to a point in the story that I need to up the drama, up the stakes, or up the drama of a backstory maybe, then I'll create something in the world that will do just that. And then on the next installment, I build off of what I created. Maybe something I created offhand in the first story will now be the center point of the next story entirely. So that's how I do it. I put story and drama first, and then build off of that. So basically, discovery as I go along. And we have a question for you, actually, by Joseph Oliveira. Exactly. I want to ask a question. Slick Jimmy, did any video game or did any game inspire you to develop your work and developing your work?
Well, I'm gonna make an admission here. When it comes to like video games, I'm a child of like the '80s, and so a lot of my stuff was basically kind of like the Atari, like Commodore 64.
Mhm.
I was really good at a game called Tempest that I could turn over and over and over, which is an arcade game. I like consoles were something I kind of picked up every now and again. I got a like a um, Sega, I can't remember what, Sega Genesis, and then I have a like an Xbox 64. I'm not a huge gamer. However, when I was younger, I used to play D&D, and I was really into that for about 4 years before I discovered girls and got distracted. Or I not discovered girls, but discovered how to entice them. Let's put it that way. And then yeah, and then I was kind of a jock too, so I played sports and things that kind of curtailed a little bit. However, I know that out there in gaming, there is some characters look very much like Sugar, and I would assume like X as well. With things like Hitman and so forth. So I would say no percent to games influencing me too much. If the threat of things do get into a person's psyche from different media, but like from it completely from playing it and then thinking about it, no, I wouldn't say that. So, but if that is something that informs your writing or your creativity, I would say wholeheartedly continue to game unless it becomes an addiction where your thumbs are bleeding. So there you go.
That sounds good to me. It's a good explanation to me. And speaking of D&D, do you know who else loved Robert E. Howard? It was Gary Gygax.
I did.
Yeah, in fact, he was reading Tolkien, and he said, "Well, this is really boring. I really like. I prefer Conan, the Conan style adventure." And that people seem to think that Gary Gygax was just trying to emulate Tolkien with the races and everything, but he was really influenced by Conan the Barbarian
Well,
as the
and I would
adventure.
see that almost immediately comparing the two. The epic, saga sort of thing on the quest. I kind of see that. People say it's Tolkien, but the rollicking adventure, the just by the seat of your pants and like finding monsters and fighting them just to fight them to get some treasure and you know
Slay the
uh,
dragon, saving the
slay the
princess.
dragon, find a hot chick and or what he would call them a wench, and she would reward him in her own special way. That is totally Conan, and that is totally Robert E. Howard. Um, Rest in peace, you idiot.
A lot of great writers tend to go that way. I mean, Hemingway,
Yeah, but
Hunter S.
Hemingway tried to
Thompson.
younger. I mean, like he was only 30 years old. Can you imagine what he could have done?
He
Can you
was such
imagine
an.
it?
He was one of my favorites. Hemingway was one of my particular favorites from this era. He's one of my favorite authors of all time. He was.
Well, he
I love
definitely
his
is a
sense
great
of like.
writer.
He had minimalism. I mean, his sense of just cutting the fat, getting right to the point. All these. He did a lot of great things. Great writer, great subjects, great people, great characters. My favorite, of course, being "The Sun Also Rises."
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I love that. Not only is that a great book altogether, but the ending lines the ending line was really effective into changing the way or inspiring the way I proceed and writing and developing things. Just that one line, isn't it beautiful to think so? And that's
Yeah.
just this is in contrast to the fantasy that Brett wanted to entice or instill on the main character. That oh,
Yeah.
we should have been together and everything like that. And then he goes, "Wasn't it pretty to think so?" I'm just like, oh man, that's this is
Let's
so amazing.
contrast like Hemingway to say Howard. Howard is all about escapism, is about this kind of power fantasy where I think Hemingway was an examination of the human condition. He had this thing called the iceberg theory. So basically,
Mhm.
what the words on the page are basically the tip of what's actually going on in the subtext. And I'm going to say something about Hemingway. As beautiful as his writing is, and as evocative as it is, and as I would say psychological as it is, it's often very depressing because it shows the human conditions in all of its, you know, all of its vagaries, you know. And often when you get done with one of his books, it doesn't necessarily make you feel happy, but it does
Mhm.
give you a sense of fulfillment because um, of what it portrays of about life, you know. But he was a man of great he was a great man of great ego. One of the stories I always remember about him is he got a Nobel Prize for the old man on the sea, which basically is a pamphlet compared to all of his other books. And he was so angry about the fact he didn't get it for the body of his work that he gave back the money and said, I don't accept the Nobel Prize. Well, you know, he's Hemingway and he had money, so.
Yeah,
But
he's also Hemingway.
that was what Hemingway did,
Yeah.
and he got to a certain point in his life. I think he was feeling his age, and I don't think he wanted to go on anymore. And you know, he ended it with a shotgun.
Mhm.
Um, but this does not negate the fact of the stature of his work over time. If you were to go out and read it, it is not something. I don't know if how you'd make his books into a comic book that would be something that people would want to read per se.
He was a writer. I mean, his magic was in prose.
Right, and definitely, where the things that he made you feel and think through his words was was where you want to do it. You'd never want to move that into another, I guess, literary medium.
Mhm.
For at least for me, I can see it being done maybe into a movie, but again, it'd have to be a movie that people would really want to see, because you're usually going to be pretty bummed out by the end of it. You know? That was just, I mean, unless you're like a movable feast or something like that, which is just kind of his exploration of himself in Paris, I believe in the 20s. And
Yes, it's supposed to be like around the law. It's supposed to be like one of the major things, at least in the Sun Also Rises. It's supposed to one of the major themes is the lost generation. So yeah, it's
yeah,
around the 20s.
so yeah, I would advise anybody who wants to learn how to write, go and delve into Hemingway. There's a whole bunch of
Absolutely, absolutely.
other books to attack and try to get into, but Hemingway is a colossus. If you learn how to write his sparse but very vibrant prose, you're probably unstoppable.
I mean, yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, if anyone wants to go into the because my personal philosophy is that minimalist writing is probably is the mark of a master. Because you know, if you are a novice at something and you do it, then you might be able to perform the task correctly, but you probably are also doing it the most inefficient way possible. You know, you do a lot more effort to accomplish one task, whereas a master just barely moves at all or barely puts in any effort at all, is able to do the task plus some. So I mean, I think about the old samurai, where you might have a novice swordsman waving around his sword, you know, trying to kill his opponent, while the master samurai will just do it in one stroke,
You know,
sort of
he'll
like
wait
that.
for his he'll wait for his moment and
Hmm.
do you a Ken shot, and that'll be that.
And that's why to me Hemingway was a master of his craft, because he was able to do a lot with so little. He chose the right words, the right time. He had the right pacing, the right characterization, the right pretty much everything.
Well, I
Uh,
mean, I do think there are different eras of writing. Say,
mhm,
go back to Victor Hugo.
mhm.
You know, spending 4 pages on a pair of candlesticks. But the candlesticks were very important to the story. You know, in Les Miserables. However, we have to remember that was before television, that was before radio,
Right.
and you were picking up a book and they were trying to construct and entertain for, sorry, for a protracted period of time. And so you read, and the same thing with like Shakespeare. People often, why is the language so flowery? Well, the truth is, it wasn't so flowery for the time. The language was trying to cut a broad cloth from the highborns to the lowborns. And only today, it seems quite flowery. But if you
Mhm.
dig into the prose of that in its pentatonic meter, you'll find out that there's a lot of dirty jokes, and there's a lot of he made up words. He turned phrases in such a way that they would poke fun at the higher up people without getting them killed. There's a lot to Shakespeare, and that there's a reason why Shakespeare is like infused into English today because of that. I mean, I'm just pulling out a few literary sources to understand why today Hemingway might be more pertinent for our time because of the attention span of how we live.
Right.
Um, but it does not negate the fact that you might want to go back and read some of these classics. You read Dostoevsky, you'll see where Hemingway got some of his flavor.
Hmm.
Um, if you read Tolstoy, you'll understand a whole lot about a place that seems very foreign, and yet it's fairly familiar. Um, War and Peace is a wonderful book. Anna Karenina is a great book, but they're not for the faint of heart because they're big old tomes. So
Oh, and they're also from Russia.
yeah, well, and a good translation isn't bad. I mean, I powered through War and Peace pretty easily. Um, it just you have to sit down and have the time to let yourself invest in it,
Hmm.
as opposed to just. I also did that with Cervantes with Man
Oh
on
yeah,
Mancha,
yeah, yeah.
and it's that's a great book, full of heart and full of humor and sadness and hope. It's a statement of its time. It's the reason why it's the Shakespeare of Spain. It really is. Sorry, going off on a tangent.
No problem at all. It's just and going from the classics over to more something more modern. Are you? I wanted to know this particular. I have this question for you. Have you ever seen the movie Heavy Metal?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the. I heard about it. I always heard about that movie, and then I actually saw it. And it's actually really good. It has a lot of stories together. It's inspired obviously from seems like the pulps, and it has these like serialized and everything. But they made a lot of fun, and it's a lot of different tones,
Yes.
and it's one of my it became one of my inspirations for things. Maybe not for Doctor Alpha specifically, but for uh, other creations I have waiting in the wings. It's how did you like that movie?
I did. Again, like y it has a little. I mean, its thread is the I can't remember the Ragnar, whether the Lochnar,
Mhm.
and that kind of goes through this kind of ancient evil sort of thing. Where I was introduced to it, I was young. I was 12, and it was a midnight movie, and everybody kept talking about because there was nudity, in it, it was cartoon nudity, and I'd never seen such a thing. So one night, I go over to the place they used to have this theater called the Carillon Squares Theater, and it was one of those ones where you have it's like a quad theater, and I got in and I stayed in there late, and I hid so that I could sneak into the midnight movie. And that's the first time I ever saw it because I wasn't old enough when it first came out
Mhm.
to see it, you know, without paying a ticket. So I did a little bit of perfidy there, but I got to see it, and they were still showing that as a midnight movie, along with things like Rocky Horror Picture Show, well into like the late '80s. So we'd often go see Heavy Metal as a midnight movie, just to, and I've probably seen that film now, well, because I own it now, but I don't know, neighborhood 25 times maybe. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot. It's a good movie. It is a good movie. I do recommend it to anyone who wants to is interested in this at least like the old style of animation. Very like something that we've lost now.
Yeah.
And if anyone wants to see these, how the pulps would look like as a movie, because it's a string of stories, but they all would settle perfectly in the pulp genres.
Yeah, and some of them have very different looks. They have a great score. I have to admit, a lot of the times when I went to the midnight movie, I wasn't really paying attention because I was going with a girl, and it's a dark room, and yeah. So but dang it, I just dropped my mouse. Yeah, if you want to go see a cool film that kind of gives you, like he's saying, these little snippets, these little and they're totally different stories that are linked together by the Lochnar, which is this glowing orb full of like this malevolent entity that informs all the stories. And when you get done, strange story, a strange um, kind of tale about this. Took them forever to put it on DVD to get it so you could buy it because they were fighting. Somehow they didn't get all the rights to the songs that are in the movie done properly, and so it couldn't be released for years because they were wrangling over the music. Stupid.
I
So
see.
for yeah,
Board
for years the
Board
only thing you could see it is in the midnight movie theater.
Board Enthusiast has a question for you. Who is the illustrator of your comic?
That would be Whiskey Paint. Now, Whiskey Paint, that's his nom de plume, and
Mhm.
he prefers to go by that. So, but he is out of Vladivostok, Russia. He is a Russian, so I'm the east to west connection. Me and him, we're partners 50-50 on this endeavor. So, whenever you guys put money in there after we get everything put where it should be to produce it, he gets half of it, and then I usually just reinvest everything. He probably gets most of the money anyway after I'm done because I'm putting it back to him or more pinups and stuff like that. So yeah, that's him, and you can find him at if you're gonna go look for him, you can find him on DeviantArt. He's also on Twitter under Whiskey Paint Art. That's whiskey without an E, so WHISKYART. No, excuse me, PAINT That's Whiskey Paint Art out there. And then you can find him on DeviantArt. He has a gallery there. You can see a lot of his work. He's been doing it for a while. He's a cool guy. I really enjoy him, and he's smart. He's funny, and he is extremely talented. And here's the funny thing that you guys will find maybe disheartening. He had a whole career in banking that he is now retired from, and this was just his hobby.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's pretty good for a hobby. It's pretty good
yeah,
for a professional.
yeah. He's as good, in my opinion, as any professional on his game today. Uh, just if he actually kind of got in a little bit with some stuff here in the U.S. and he took kind of a look at what was going on, he said,
Mm.
"Nope, I'm out."
It's gonna be mandated to draw some man women or something.
Yeah, I mean, he has a kind of a penchant uh, for like manga with a European flavor, and
Mhm.
so a lot of his work kind of has that, but it's not manga. It just has that vibe. And if anybody knows where Vladivostok is, I'm trying to give you a little geography. Vladivostok is at the end of the Trans-Siberian Railway to the east, and it's there's a bay, and it's about 125 miles north of North Korea. So it's really in Asia, but Russia's Eurasian. So
Yeah, Russia's huge too, so
yeah.
it spans a quite a long way.
People don't realize there are actually Caucasians that live in Asia. They're just in Russia.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, they're native to the to the area. So
And what would be interesting, what I would have wanted to see in this comic, I'm not sure if you're going to do that or not, but you mentioned that, of course, it was Little Girl Lethal was a novelization to begin with. I thought
mhm.
it'd be interesting, like be interesting to me if you added in like a short story at the very end, like if you have something unlocks or something, uh, a short story at the very end, like something that's a little extra. Because
I'd have to really keep it short because
oh yeah,
that would add extra
oh
pages.
yeah.
But I mean, I don't know, maybe like a 3-page story,
So,
something real, and make it a little dense and its um, font, or something like that. That's an idea. I have plenty of stories to pick from.
mhm.
They would just kind of be a random story, though it wouldn't really fit in with the actual narrative of the main story in the comic itself. But yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff that I've I think it's fun because you got to believe in your own work.
Oh yeah,
And, so yeah,
and
that's not a bad idea. Put it in the back in the end
it,
pages or something.
because one thing I recently got into, I'm working on a video, uh, Western versus Eastern storytelling, and so I read up on some manga and watched some general Asian movies from Asia, not just Japan, but from
Right.
Asia in general. And one thing I really got into almost incidentally was a series called Goblin Slayer. And I bring that up is because it's a graphic novel. I mean, it's a light novel. But the creator of Goblin Slayer has also produced prose novels for the series, which I discovered. So it's you can have the comic, and then there's the adventure continues in this. These books are just prose novels, and I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't see that very often, where you pair the comic series with a series of just of this prose novels, and so that kind of I was thinking about doing something like that for Doctor Alpha, maybe just adding like a short story at the end. I have two short stories in mind for graphic novel production, so they're going to be comics. But I was kind of playing with the idea of having a prose short story included in there somewhere.
I don't
If
think
you
that's a
know,
bad idea at all, actually.
yeah. I mean, of course, it have to be really short, but I mean, it doesn't
Yeah,
have to be this grand adventure. It can just be like a little touch of something.
I mean, you can do it like I read a lot of these things. You can go on like Amazon and they have these compilation books of like crime fiction,
Hmm.
and they'll have like horror fiction as well of contemporary writers, and they'll have these little stories that some of them will be like 5 pages long, but they'll have a lot of punch. That
Right.
they really harken back to the pulps because the idea is to tell an engaging story in a short time. So it's kind of like flash fiction a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, if you do something like that, you polish it up a little bit and you get all, you put all your little pieces in there just right. I mean, it'd be something real fun to have in the back. I mean, I know a lot of people who are into comics aren't into prose, maybe, but maybe you can give them a taste, and then they're like, I want more.
I mean, Alan Moore did that was a pretty bold move for Alan Moore to do when he did did Watchmen. He added
Yeah,
in excerpts from the fictional novel, I think was Beneath the Mask or something like that. And I thought that was kind of strange. Why is there all this writing in my comic? But it was interesting. He did a good job, a very good
he
job.
did. That's it's going to be one of those things. 100 years from now, people will still be referring to it. I believe, um, and regardless of whether he thinks he's a wizard or not,
He sure
it's
thinks
great.
so.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys that people will be referring to him for a long time, and how he did things and be examining it. And I think, yeah, throwing a little bit of prose in there, especially if you're confident in your prose,
Hmm.
is a good thing. If it's crap, then you're taking a risk. So I would, like I said, polish the living death out of it before
Oh yeah.
I put it in something. But if you want to put it in back pages and you'd throw it in front of like some beta readers who said, yeah, this is good,
Hmm.
people you trust, and then yeah, I think that's not a bad idea at all. In fact, maybe I'd think about it. I got a pretty thick gallery right now though, so I need to leave a few end pages for and then a front page where I'd do a signature if somebody wanted to hand me the book back. Yeah. For those of you who do want like a signed autograph copy from both me and Whiskey Paint, you can pick up $120. It'll cost you because I have to ship it to Vladivostok and ship it back, and it's to me, and it's the major hassle. So, and if anything happens to it on the interim, we'd have to do it all over again.
Hmm.
It's one of those things. But if you want one, it's there.
So, the board enthusiast, what is the difference between pulp and flash fiction? I would say pulp fiction is more mainly from the fiction you get from the golden age of pulp, which is just basically it's formulaic. A lot of them they have their formulas. And usually it revolves around crime, or it spans a lot of genres. So you get like sword and sorcery came from there. The Cthulhu mythos came from there. There's basically what connects them usually is something it's there to entertain you. There, it's
Yeah.
it's escapist. It's
It was
there
supposed
just
to be very cheap
yeah.
publications. They came in little magazines, and
Mhm.
they'd have a bunch of stories, and these artists, writers would send stuff in, and it would be a monthly periodical that you would pick
Mhm.
up, and thus they were made out of that pulpy paper that's very
Yep,
much
cheap
like
paper.
newsprint, and it's very cheap, and so pulp. Whereas flash fiction, you want to dive into what flash fiction is?
Flash fiction is something that's, I think it's a little more modern. It's becoming a more modern trend for shorter and shorter effective fiction. And flash fiction is just something that's very, very short. I mean, incredibly short. I think flash fiction might be my paragraph, maybe 500 words, something like that. Something like
Yeah,
that.
they give you a set time usually,
Yeah.
and you lay down and you try to. It's often stream of consciousness, and try to set down a story that would make some sense.
Mhm.
Some flash fiction's pretty damn good. Other flash fiction, not so much. So that's the difference. Totally different format, totally different reason why you're doing it. Flash fiction often isn't paid very highly because
Yeah.
it's often like a thought exercise more than anything else.
Right. The Dark Tiger, I want to know how to avoid bad exposition. Any tips?
Show don't tell.
Yeah.
Uh,
Or
that's
limit exposition, I'd say, to absolute
yeah.
minimum, like like author spewed
As you
exposition.
know,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the that's the
don't do
yeah.
that.
As you know, blah 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 blah. Well, I already know that. Why are you explaining that to me? Because the audience doesn't know, of course.
I would say if you can mix in your exposition within action, try to do that.
Mhm.
There are times when exposition is needed, and you can get away with it. It's just don't be too pedantic, don't be too on the nose. Try to work it into like everyday language, but don't work it so much that it seems awkward. So you're having to spend a whole lot of dialogue to convey something that could be said in 3 4 lines
Mhm.
of obvious exposition, but it's not. I mean, just I guess way is to hide it in plain sight. Is it, if that's a good way of saying it? Uh, Exposition can be really, really annoying, especially to writers who see it all the time, where it's just like, you must look here, right here, and keep looking here because we told you to. Yeah, that gets tiring real quick, and you see it all the time in mass media. It's just lazy writing, and when you're under a time constraint, sometimes when you're getting paid by you know whether you get done on a deadline, people resort to it. But if you have something you love, you can take time to craft it and put it in front of beta readers and your writers groups and that things, and figure out a good way to hide your exposition without um, tipping your hand too
Yeah, I would
much.
say. I mean, yeah, that's the probably the best idea that any tip that you could offer right there is what you said. Is hide your exposition in action. Like, say
Yeah,
Matthew walked out of his house one night and he ran into an alien. Instead of Matthew walked out of his house one night and then he saw an alien and he was kind of blah 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 blah. But so it's action. Use action. He ran into the alien, or he instantly encountered someone shoved a laser beam in his face or something. He walked out of his house and his mouth was quickly filled with a laser gun or something, something like that.
yeah. And if quickly filled with a laser gun, I have your sister.
Yeah.
And then that sort of thing, like, and you don't have to go into what, like, he's taking a sister and they're off in a spaceship and blah 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 blah. You don't have to have some ancillary character filling in the blanks. You
So
can just roll with it.
that one little event, you instantly know that the aliens exist in this world. They're a threat. They have laser guns, and he has a sister, and she's been captured. Instead of saying all that, it's he walks out, gets a mouthful of laser gun, and the alien says, "I have your sister." That's so you get all that as instead of exposition, it's done in actions.
And then the alien will say, you have to do such and such. It'll set you on your goal to get your sister back. If you don't, the sister will be turned into a gelatinous goo that will serve us forever, or something like that. That's that's how you do it. And again, every writer will fall into the trap of doing exposition, and then later
Mm.
on go back and look at it and go, oh, I'm being too on the nose. And you'll have to. That's what editing is for. That is why why editing is the bane of your existence once you have your manuscript in hand.
Yeah. Neil Gaiman said that the first draft is where you do all your main work, but his main quote is on the second draft. Was second draft is where you make yourself look like you knew what you're doing all along.
Right, exactly. And it's fine. Like to have a super rough first draft. I just get it down, because then you have this feeling of accomplishment, even if it's shit. You have a feeling of accomplishment. It's there in your hands. You have it, and you can cut it or expand it or change it any way you want once you have it there, but it's always there, as opposed to having it, like sitting in your head like this cloud that won't go away until you finish. And but if you're like, self-editing as you go along, that becomes very onerous. That's one of the things I had to learn to overcome, is to not edit
Yeah.
while I'm writing, because I need to get it out. And if you want to do an edit right there, make a note. I have Scrivener. That's what I usually use. And you have a thing where you can write a little note there for later. And then as you go back, the note will pop up. So you don't have to worry about anything else, and you don't have to go off on this tangent or try to fix something or get the language just perfect at that point. You can just move on to the next thing, especially if you've already, set your outline, your
Mm.
plot, you've plotted it out. I don't know if anybody's heard the difference between plotters and pantsers. Plotters are people who do a structure and then they kind of follow it. And then pantsers are people who just write off the cuff. Now, if you're a pantser, that means you have a skill set already in your head as to how to, and construct things. Like Stephen King, he's a
Mm.
pantser, but he has this ability to do that because he knows how to do things. If you're not like that and you haven't been writing a long time, I would say learn how to plot so that it becomes intrinsic to your nature and what you're writing. And then you can pants all you want. Sorry, again, another tangent.
So, well, that's why we're here to get on tangents and talk about things. SD Ravana asks, "What tips do you have for creating a fictional language?" That I don't ever do. I just say if I need a language that doesn't exist, or even if it's a language that does exist already, I'd say the character just I write out what he says in English or whatever language it is, and then I just say, "Said Matt in Russian," or "He said in Martian," or
Right. I mean, doing things in another language, if you're going to be Tolkien-esque about it, and create your own languages, like you got Mordorian and Elvish and Dwarvish and all that stuff, you better be a linguist because that takes a lot of time for construction.
Tolkien
I
was that was his hobby. That was one of his great interests was creating languages. That's why he
and
had so
he was
many.
good at it. And you can learn how to speak Elvish if you really want to.
Yeah, you can speak Black Speak, you can speak Elvish, you can speak any language he created. You can actually learn how to speak because he was a linguist.
Right. And so that's it. I mean, it's going to take you extra time. However, if you do want to come up with like sounds, I guess you could make yourself your own little alphabet, and then assign sounds to it, and then make the words off those sounds, and then assign to those words analogous English word, and then you could do it that way. I suppose it's a lot of work, but if it's something you have passion for, I would say go for it. And there's a lot of. It's nice to have in the back a glossary of different words for your imaginary world. Or I mean, often when I write, I look for languages that I know, and then I will pick. Often when I do names or place names, or like swear words or something like that in an imaginary word, I'll use already established languages on my world, on our world, and look them up, and then maybe tweak them just a little bit. So, like in the world of Lost Peaks, um, they have the Empire of Britannica as opposed to Britain. So
Right.
Britannica, and it goes back to the fact that Britannica was the Roman Empire never quite went away. It just kind of morphed a little bit, and then at one point, like they had in our world, we had the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire in Byzantium, and the other in Constantinople, Byzantium, which is now Istanbul, and then the other one in Rome. Well, the capital itself in this world migrated to Londinium, and it still was the Roman Empire, but they put the capital there. And so when the British had their hegemony over the world and were fighting with the Mongols, which is how it went down in my world, um, that has a history to it. And then I take and Londinium is actually the name of London before it was London, and I just kept it that way. So those are things you can do for, I guess, language purposes. Don't be afraid to portmanteau things, which basically means mash words together and make a new word. Um, Don't be able to be afraid to parse things out and look at the roots of like in either Greek or Latin or whatever it is, and then put together a new idea, a new language. Maybe look at how, say, Chinese, Mandarin, and Slavic root words, or Turkic, could be messed around with, and you can get a new language there. I'm just spitballing here.
Sounds no, that sounds like it work to me. I mean, it's a lot of writers' work. I mean, if you look at Piers Anthony's work,
Mhm.
he does science fiction slash fantasy, and his great epic is this the land of Xanth, and
Yeah,
I believe Xanth, the shape of the world of Xanth, is just the state
it's
he lives
Florida.
in. Yeah,
It's
it's just
Florida.
Florida.
Yeah,
It's just Florida.
which makes a lot of sense considering what goes on in Florida. Yeah. So, but I mean, like, yeah, I read all of those books when I was a kid. Well, when I was in my teenage years,
Mm.
and I don't have any of the other. I don't have almost all of them. I don't know what happened to them. I put them in a box somewhere, but I still have Ogre, and I can see it on my shelf right
Oh
now.
yeah, yeah. And are you really interested in any of his other works?
I liked the one where the I can't remember the name of that series, but it
Yeah.
was um it was like magical and futuristic, and it
Is it
followed the adventures of death.
yeah, Incarnations of Immortality?
That's what it was, yeah.
That's the series I've read. I haven't read all of his Anth. I think I read the first one, the Chameleon, something for a spell for chameleon. I think
Yeah.
something like that. I read the first one. That was pretty good. That was pure Piers Anthony. But I really liked his Incarnations of Immortality series. Uh, that was because the first one followed death, and then the next one followed, I believe, time.
Hmm.
It's different incarnations per book. It was very interesting, and of course, it being Piers Anthony, it all ends up like incestuous and stuff. But the whole
Yeah.
overarching story is actually pretty good. And I really like the depiction of the main villain, Satan, or the devil, in that series.
I do find it funny though that a lot of people in this generation don't know Piers Anthony at all because he just kind of fell out of the cultural, the cultural. I'm blanking on the word here, but he fell out of the culture. A lot of people don't know who he is
Mhm.
anymore, which I find strange because he was so popular for
Oh
quite a
yeah,
while.
he's a
Um,
very big guy, very big author.
and I'm trying to think of another book he did. I remember one thing about his writing. He loved the word balk.
Yes, he did.
Balk. He used it all the time.
A question from the board enthusiast. I'm interested. How do you become a flash fiction writer, and how do you get your stuff out there? As far as flash fiction goes, I think it might be something like very, very. I'm not sure if it's how in demand it is. I think it might be something a magazine might ask for or something.
Maybe, yeah, there's some online zines I think that do flash fiction depending on the genre. Um, you know, I'm going to be honest with you these days. A lot of these have been infested with the same thing that infests comics right now.
Yeah,
And so
everywhere.
if you write about a certain thing, some people might take offense to it. It doesn't, and it could be something you would think is completely innocuous, and then they'll get mad at you. I got kicked out of a NaNoWriMo a group on Facebook because I said I didn't like feminism. That was,
Wow.
and people freaked out. And then they said, "Well, we'll let you back in, but you gotta, there are things you cannot." And I'm like, "I cannot say." So freedom of speech, and well, that's not. I'm like, that's exact. I think we've had a parting of the ways. Um,
You gotta pledge your allegiance to the new religion.
yeah, and it's very much like that. Very much in 1984, in these little, echo chamber type places. So what I'm saying is, as you go out there, look, if you want to do these things, you can go to like writers workshops, writers conferences, and they will have these flash fiction competitions. And there may be a little cash prize depending on where you're going. There may be some online ones. You can look up flash fiction on Google it or whatever, and see if anybody does that sort of thing and how they're structuring their competitions. But it usually is a competition. If you're just doing flash fiction for yourself, it's very hard to sell
Mhm.
unless you did something masterwork, because there are limits usually with flash fiction. You set a limit to what you're doing. Otherwise, it just becomes like short story or short.
and how to get your work out there. As far as I know, if you're going into the indie publishing, the one thing that is guaranteed, that's not guaranteed to work, but your best bet is not social media. It's not a writer's blog, because those things have proven that they aren't very effective. If you
Yeah.
want to get your work out there as an indie publisher, it's actually mass production. You have to get a lot of things. You have to publish a lot of things in a short amount of time.
Yeah, if you're gonna do like the indie route to do like prose, like do your own stories, put it on Amazon, you got to kind of hit a sweet spot. So you wanna write it somewhere. So I've heard people say as short as like 75 pages,
Mhm.
or I can't remember how many words that was, but around 75 pages. I would shoot for like 125 pages. That was kind of like those old pulp things I was talking about, the
Yeah.
Destroyer or Mac Bowl. It was about 125 pages that they had. I can't remember how many words that those were in, but it wasn't a ton, say like 130, I guess, or 30,000.
Basically, you have to find a niche, and you need to
Yeah.
find, and you need to mass produce in that niche.
All right. And then you have to do, I would say before you release, do three of them. And to your satisfaction and satisfaction of your beta readers, and then um, put out one, and then advertise the next one. Again, I haven't done this, so this is what I've heard from people who are very, very successful. Then get on the next one, and then you have another one in the pipeline already there. So when you release the second one, you have another one. So you just keep doing it, and then you keep rolling it until you have your catalog up to, say, I don't know, 10, 12 books, and
Mhm.
you just keep pumping those out. And then once you get a following, then you're allowed to do like maybe a bigger masterwork
Mhm.
that is a little bit longer, and because you have people that are chomping on the bit to get it. But you have to build a platform, just like a lot of people talk about in comics. You have to build a platform so people will come. If you're just some cold guy and throwing it out there, unless somehow, lightning in a bottle, it's not going to work as easy as some people might want it to.
But if it does work, I mean, it can be pretty lucrative. I mean, some of these people I know have they went into the
Oh yeah,
when the superhero genre was a niche. These people have quit their engineering jobs because this paid out so much, so well when they produced story after story. But again, they mass produced. It wasn't just one epic novel or anything like that. They produced story after story after story, and they built it up over time. So it is building up a platform. The same thing you would probably do on YouTube or Twitter or anything like that.
yeah. I mean, Jim Butcher has a great story about how he became a published author, and this is with Legacy Publishing. He wrote, I think he said, 5 novels. They're his trunk novels that he's never going to show anybody, before he came upon his first, Dresden book that kind of he got in front of the agent for, oh, my blanking on her name, Anne Rice.
Oh yeah.
I think it was Anne Rice. I think it was Anne Rice. Could be wrong. Um, but it was a very for an author who was very well established. And then they went from there, and then she made notes, and he um, assiduously did what she told him to do to get it published, and then he got it published. And then so now Jim Butcher is a very well established author, but it's a different route than, say, self publishing. And whereas self publishing, you will get a much larger cut of what you sell, but you're going to have to do a hell of a lot more legwork. You're going to have to promote the living shit out of
Mhm.
yourself. So it's going to be like, not only are you a writer, but you're promoting yourself, and you're trying to get your work before eyeballs, and that's a lot of that's a lot of long haul uh, to do. So don't not trying to discourage people, just saying that,
This reality is, be
yeah,
prepared. That's what you have. It's what you're gonna have to do if you want to go the indie route. You're gonna have
right,
to play the writer, and you're gonna have to play the publisher. You're gonna advertise it for yourself.
yeah. You're not necessarily the publisher per se, but you are the person who's probably getting everything formatted, unless you can
Mm.
have somebody pay for that. If you're going to put it into digital format, and then if they're going to do a one-off, books, that sort of thing, all this stuff has to be put out there, and people have to know about it, and you have to have the website, and possibly a YouTube channel talking about what you're doing, and to get on Twitter and get on Instagram and get on Facebook, and constantly be on this. It's like a whole different whole different life than, say, your 9 to 5 that you're gonna have to have on top of it. Plus, you're gonna have to live and somehow bring in money while you're doing it. Again, not trying to discourage people, just trying to be realistic, because you can become a success. I am not that success. I'm just a guy that had a fairly done okay Indiegogo, and I had Delusions of Grandeur with my novelization that hasn't yet panned out, but I've talked to many people who have become successful. Where I live is like it's like a mecca for YA authors. There's so many people from here in Utah that write. Plus, there's a bunch of sci-fi authors around here as well. Brendan Sanderson lives like 2 towns over from me. Met him multiple times. If anybody knows who he is, very, he's a New York Times best-selling author. Took over the wheel of time from Robert Jordan. He teaches a class at the local university, and you meet a lot of people through that way. And this is what they say. This is what has to happen. And even so, then you are rolling the ball on the roulette wheel. But the harder you work, the more elbow grease and moxie you put into it, the more likely you're going to hit green. So,
I think it's a good place to end the stream. We're going about 2 hours. Go ahead and end the stream there. And I want to thank you, Slick Jimmy, for joining me tonight and sharing with us your wisdom and your advice. And I really like the aesthetic and all the inspirations you have going into Little Girl Lethal. And I encourage anyone who's interested in this sort of fiction, the Sin City sort of fiction, the pulp genre sort of fiction, to go ahead and purchase a tier. It looks very promising. It sounds very promising to me. And Slick Jimmy seems very talented. Seems like he knows what he's doing, as far as I've seen.
I hope. I mean, I'm a 13-year-old boy trapped in a 50-year-old man's body. So
that's how you write.
Yeah,
that's the perfect way to write.
I would advise everybody to look out for our hosts here. His book that's coming out soon. What was the name of it again?
Oh, yes. My comic, Dr.
Yes.
Alpha. I'm addicted to contrast. So Dr. Alpha is going to be set in a golden age era, but Dr. Alpha himself is more like the Joker from the Dark Knight. So I think I said in the video, the last episode of Is Comics Get Wrong, that it's going to be kind of like if you watch the Super Friends versus the Jigsaw from Saw. It's kind of like that. So he's kind of like I think there's a trope for it. I forgot what it's called. There's like Blood Knight or something. But the villain who kind of just comes in and totally changes the trajectory and the tone of the show. I forgot what the actual trope is called, but he's one of those. And there's plot reasons for why it's kept in a constant state of the golden age. But you'll see what that might be in the future when it actually comes out.
I appreciate you having me on. Thanks, man.
No problem. It's been very fun. It's been very informative. I think the chat would agree. It's also your presence has been very informative, been very interesting, and I wish you luck on this current project and any future projects you have.
Got to make the luck happen.
Yeah. Make your own luck.
That's right. Thank you again.
All right. Well, you have a good night, everyone. Good night, chat, and I'll see you next week.
Good night, chat.